on these sessions.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, like
Oh,
about
cool.
like, the economy and stuff like that. Stuff that like just interesting seeing it. It's been kind of hard, like having feeding my kids and like listening in one ear to some of the stuff.
Yeah. Did you sign up for a brain date?
No, I did not yet. I think I'm gonna try to sign up for one for tomorrow.
Oh, good job.
Now, is there a was there? It was just the Q&A after this. There wasn't. I thought wasn't there a breakout or something like that?
No breakouts.
Okay.
So we are live and just gonna let us know when people start joining. I see that.
Yep.
I'm gonna
Okay,
mute
cool. I
that.
have I scheduled a brain date actually for later today on anti-racism and allyship. Because that's something I am a big advocate of at Accenture Canada. So we'll see how that goes.
Excellent.
Okay, I'm just checking. We are live now.
You can see us.
Yeah, I can see you guys.
Okay.
Just gonna wait for Deanna to let us know when we should start.
Cool.
Now there is a lag too, so just FYI.
Okay.
But it's not like a lag like when you're recording something and you swear and then you're able to cut it out. It's just a lag.
Okay. Good to know.
Okay, I think we're ready to start. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us on this discussion on the future of retail. My name is Paul Godette. I'm a co-founder of Dig Insights. It's a Toronto-based consumer insights and technology company. I'm here to provide more of the consumer perspective of what we've been seeing since the beginning of the pandemic and how that is expected to impact the future of retail. I'm joined by two very knowledgeable and respected individuals, Lisa Amlani and Erwan Rambourg. Lisa is the senior retail strategist at Accenture, retail industry expert with over 20 years of experience leading high impact teams across North America and Europe. And Erwan is the managing director of consumer and retail research at HSBC and the author of Future Lux, an exploration of the major forces and emerging trends that are set to reshape luxury over the next decade. So welcome, guys.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So, this is a big topic and it's, quite involved. So what I thought we would do is start with a little bit of kind of more of the consumer perspective of things, see what's kind of been going on in terms of the changes from the consumer behaviors and the retail landscape, and then focus on how that may impact the future of retail. So I'm going to kick it off with a couple insights from what we've been seeing in terms of changes in consumer behaviors, and then I'm going to throw it over to you guys with some questions.
Okay.
We're going to keep an eye on some of the questions from the group. So if anyone has questions that they want to ask throughout, feel free to throw it in there. We're going to look at those, and then we'll ask those throughout the session. So, just from a overall perspective, we've been doing some tracking from consumer behaviors since the beginning of the pandemic. We have a lot of Fortune 500 clients that we work with that they're asking a lot of questions in terms of changes in the behaviors and how that's affecting their businesses. And really, we're seeing some pretty big themes. One is there's definitely a divide between the secure and the unsure. So even though consumers themselves, the majority are feeling fairly confident in their financial position, and that's a North American view. That level of confidence is starting to decrease a little bit as government benefits start to fade. And there is that little bit more of that divide between those that have and those that don't necessarily have yet or are afraid that they're going to lose. What's also interesting is that spending habits changed drastically as consumers, were in lockdown, but still wanted to fulfill certain needs. So splurges have happened in certain sectors. Example, grocery, people buying more premium products to have at home. Alcohol, very kind of similar experience. More expensive casual non-work clothing. So think like, Nike Airs or Lululemon athleisure type of products. there's a drive to more inconspicuous consumption. And we'll touch on that a bit later, but that desire to buy, but at the same time not show off. And a lot of that has to do with just the situation right now and what that might look like in the future. And the way people are shopping is very different. So one of our studies showed that over 30% of North Americans had done some sort of grocery shopping or curbside delivery or pickup. And half of those would actually prefer to do that even once the pandemic's over. So we see a drastic and forced change in the way the consumers are behaving, and to experiences that they've now realized they actually like. Consider telemedicine, for example. Once you've actually been able to expose to it, it's hard to imagine going back and waiting an hour and a half at the doctor's office for an appointment that may not happen. So there's definitely a change in the consumer behaviors and how that's affecting how people are shopping. Work from home. So again, we've talked about this, and even in this this conference, but really affecting where people are spending their money and which retailers they're visiting. It's affected habits. So consider things like breakfast, for example, where people are just having it at home. They're not going to their quick serve restaurant for coffee anymore. How is that going to impact long term if more consumers are actually going to be working from home or working remotely? And then lastly, in terms of just consumers' expectations of companies are really different. It used to be that corporate social responsibility was a differentiator. Now it's a table stake. Value is still very, very important. It's a kind of a key consideration in terms of that decision. So these are kind of broad consumer behaviors that we're seeing as since the beginning of the pandemic. And a lot of those are really affecting how people are going to shop in the future and what the future retail might look like. Now, again, much more of a North American view, and definitely more tailored to the consumer lens. And there's differences across retailers, different types, home improvement, grocers, apparel, etc. So, one of those things I'd like to throw out to Lisa is maybe help kind of explain the differences that you're seeing across different types of retailers, who's doing okay and really who's not.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can all attest to the fact that we're probably maybe wearing Lululemons right now. So I would say athleisure, any sort of active wear, any sort of casual wear is absolutely doing very, very, very well. We can definitely see the stats, and the shares were up even for Lululemon. Nike's doing very, very well. Athleisure is one area, and then of course you mentioned grocery and absolutely Home Depot. They're thinking, I think they announced yesterday they're going to have 2 months of Black Friday. So Black Friday is a whole other conversation, which what is going to happen even for Christmas shopping. So I think that in terms of what's happening in the future of retail with different types of retailers, some are doing very well, some are not. Small businesses are absolutely suffering. But then again, they do have more of a focus on local. So that local artisan, Amazon is, they're shifting to more artisan type product, like an Etsy marketplace. So I think that, as some are suffering, some are really doing super, super well.
So, but aside from more of that, a lot of that we can attribute to some of the behavioral changes that we're experiencing right now. As we get out of that, who do you think, Erwan, what kind of companies do you think are going to be able to kind of survive, once we get out of this pandemic, and maybe if we kind of return back to kind of this normal, some sort of normality where I'm actually in an office. This isn't a fake background. This is actually my office. Who's going to survive that?
I think you started with a point around the haves and the have-nots in North America. And you've had a lot of people trying to figure out which shape of recovery we could be hoping for. And, people like to use letters, a V-shaped recovery, a W-shaped recovery, an L, a U. I think there have been a lot of interesting articles over the past few weeks on a K-shaped recovery. Actually, and that's been discussed socially and politically as well during the election campaign in the US. K-shaped recovery basically meaning that the haves are actually well off and they're staying at home and they are ordering a lot, and there is an element of pent-up demand on premium goods. And to your point, Lisa, as well, people are trying to keep a healthy mind, keep a healthy body, and we're all watching yoga tutorials and trying to stay fit and a bit healthy. And unfortunately, you have the other part of the K where people who are not that well off are struggling. So I think what you're seeing, or at least what I'm seeing, and obviously I have a bit of a luxury bias because that's essentially what I cover. You are seeing pent-up demand really benefiting the higher-end products. And I suspect that you have a similar dichotomy of consumption with the super high-end working very well on one side, and then more commoditized trade and more access price points also doing well. And there's probably a risk that some brands that are stuck in the middle are a bit struggling and going nowhere. The bulk of what I cover again is essentially luxury products. We've seen evidence of what the press called revenge purchasing in China. I wouldn't really call it revenge purchasing in North America, but there is this idea that you've survived this. You've gone through this period of 4 months of constraints and struggle, and it's okay to reward yourself. You're allowed to reward yourself, and I think we're seeing a lot. I mean, you were mentioning Nike, you were mentioning Lululemon. I'm seeing it on the higher end brands selling handbags and jewelry, and who needs a handbag today if you're staying at home? Well, it just so happens that that category is doing very well because people are thinking, I deserve this. I've sat at home and I've struggled through this period, and now I'm allowed to reward myself again. So we are seeing pent-up demand. Again, I wouldn't call it revenge purchasing because it's maybe not off the charts positive, but a lot of the brands that I cover are actually growing again year on year as of June or maybe July and August. So it's quite surprising.
So we've seen, you talked about kind of the more that revenge purchasing, more higher end products. What about that middle then? We're seeing chains, basically every single, I guess like a Hudson's Bay or a Lord and Taylor, a Macy's, a JC Penney, all those now basically going bankrupt and out of business. There's now seems to be a very, very different between like that small independents who are, to Lisa's point, kind of that artisan, Etsy feel, and then to your point, kind of the more higher end. It feels like that middle is just kind of getting wiped out. Is that fair? What do you guys think?
I don't think that the middle is getting wiped out. I do think that retailers are shifting the way they're working, their mindsets, how they're actually creating products and product assortments, and everything starts with the consumer. So whether it's personalization, whether it's validation by the consumer before actually creating the product, using digital product creation to reduce that carbon footprint, everything really comes down to the consumer, and the consumer should be in the middle. So whether it's the shopping experience online versus in store, the actual product assortment has become more seasonless. Fashion runway on TikTok. I mean, things are absolutely changing, and retailers are starting to, I would say, move with that in mind, where the customer is front and center, and it's not always about having those 8 drops of product in a season or in a year. Things are shifting, and things are shifting quickly. And if HBC does not get on that bandwagon, and if Macy's does not get on that bandwagon, yes, they will go bankrupt. But most retailers, HBC not included, have started to look at, what does that store of the future look like? What does the future of retail look like? And what does my consumer really, really want?
Right. But then you think about, again, you mentioned kind of that even digital strategy. So there's a retail strategy, and the retail strategy can encompass the brick and mortar. It can encompass an online, this whole idea of omni-channel, the touch points with consumers, people even just live streaming, influencers live streaming and purchasing, almost like the shopping channels made a comeback. There's all these different ways now in which consumers are shopping. So let's talk about the future. Let's talk about where we think things are going. Brick and mortar, does that still exist? As we've seen, a substantial shift in consumers shopping online, and now actually getting used to shopping online and preferring to shop online for a number of reasons, not only just in terms of convenience, but also personalization. What is that, brick and mortar? Is that still relevant? Is that still around in the post-pandemic days?
Erwan, do you want to take this? because I can talk about this forever.
Yeah, I think there's something really interesting you said, Lisa, around the consumer being at the center, and Nike has this motto, which is the consumer decides. And if the consumer decides that it's convenient to shop online, or if the consumer decides that if you're going to a store, it better be fun, that puts a lot of pressure on sort of undifferentiated multi-brand retail. And so I think at the end of the day, you know, brick and mortar still has a fundamental role to play, but it can't be any brick and mortar. You know, you have to think about destination stores. You have to think about entertainment. You know, I think one thing that maybe I learned from, you know, living in Asia for a while and you know, studying closely the patterns of Chinese consumption for luxury is that you have to remember that it's a day out and it needs to be fun, and you're going shopping with friends and family and coworkers, and it's a mix between retail and entertainment. And you know, you've had this barbaric term of retailtainment, which again is very valid in Asia, but is starting to be incredibly relevant with Western consumers. So I'm far from believing that brick and mortar is dead. I just think that you've had a habit for the past 15 years of developing stores, and once you have one concept that you think works, you basically do a copy and paste, and you open, you know, 40 or 50 of that same concept. And I don't think consumers want that anymore. You know, they have so much to choose from. And again, if you're going shopping today, you're really on a mission, you know, because people are still a bit nervous. I think traffic is down tremendously, but conversion rates are up. Average unit retail is up. If you're ready, if you're brave enough to go shopping, you know, it better be efficient, but it better be fun as well. You better remember it. So I'm very confident about the future of brick and mortar. I'm very confident, especially for, again, the more premium space that I cover, because if you think about luxury, luxury is essentially a recruitment business. You know, most people who buy luxury items buy them for the first time. And I think there's a limit to how much you can sell online. And if you're buying your first branded handbag, your first branded high-end piece of jewelry, you're into storytelling, you know, and if your story is, I've clicked twice and I waited a week and I got my product, it's incredibly dull. So I'm super bullish about the future of brick and mortar. It's just not any type of brick and mortar. You know, there's a lot of pressure for people to be creative.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. In fact, I would add to that in terms of the customer experience, where you look at a TK Maxx, HomeSense, Winners, how busy they are. There are lineups outside the stores, and they do not really have a DTC presence. But right now, they are killing it. And the reason for that is because of that customer shopping experience. Because the customer right now is going out and they don't want to browse. They want to just go and get what they need and get out of the store. But then you look at a Winners, they do go there for that experience, for that treasure hunt. So I think that there's a bit of both, but yes, I generally do agree with you that brick and mortar is absolutely not dying, but the experience within brick and mortar is changing and needs to change.
So there's a couple things to unpack there, and I think there's you know the perspectives of, we talk about consumer experience, that having to change drastically from a brick and mortar perspective, and that's costly. You know, so when we think about, you know, who's going to survive in that brick and mortar, you know, I don't know that it's going to be the small independents who are going to be able to invest in a differentiated consumer experience, but maybe I'm wrong. What about shopping malls? I mean, shopping malls that, you know, you think, you know, again, a lot of times placed in downtown urban cores where people are, you know, maybe not necessarily working in the offices. You know, those leases are long term, but also, you know, we see some really high turnover. You know, what do shopping malls exist anymore in the future?
Yeah, I think they do. In fact, the shopping mall is changing. What Erwan mentioned earlier about retail entertainment, what you'll see in a shopping mall in the next 5 years is going to change. It's changed, like in Richmond with the Richmond Center, where they're actually having living spaces there. So the fact that curbside has a bigger just a bigger space in a shopping center. Also, the fitting room is changing. So if you're living above the store, the salesperson can actually come to your place, curbside pickup, not really, they're dropping it off and you're trying it on in your home. So your home is the fitting room. In terms of Cadillac Fairview Eaton Center, they've eliminated the parking fee if you are going to pick up your shopping curbside. So that's an advantage, and that's going to get the customer at least to get closer to the shopping mall. Right. You know, the way that they're configuring the shopping mall is different. So there's a lot more space, a lot more physical distancing. The fact that mask stations are being put in at the entrances of malls. So I think that, like I said, it's the safety and convenience of the customer that's going to drive what the shopping mall is going to look like in the future. And the fact is, people are going to work from home. Convenience is so important, and safety.
Well, yeah,
I've gotten a bit of feedback on you know, closed shopping malls versus outlet malls, which tend to be more open air, and people seem to be more comfortable to go to outlet malls these days because, again, they feel that they're out in the open, and it's, you know, you get more respect in terms of the social distancing aspects. That will evolve eventually, but I guess, you know, in the short term, it seems that open air malls are clearly preferred. Yes. People are not back in a big way just yet. So I think in the initial stage of reacquainting yourself with retail, you know, there's still a fair bit of caution.
What about, like, just even those, you know, we talked about that brick and mortar still being alive. It may, you know, that whole customer experience may change. What about, you know, those small independents who want to, or where most of the business is probably still online? Is there an opportunity for them, especially maybe with pop-up type of stores, to allow some sort of, you know, experience with the product, but, you know, still have a largely online strategy that delivers to the consumer without the, again, kind of traditional, you know, characteristics of a brick and mortar in terms of inventory and lease and all that type of stuff? Is there, you know, how does that change for that smaller, more independent, or maybe even the bigger players who just don't want to get into leases and inventory anymore?
That's actually already changing. Macy's has new concept stores that are much, much smaller and more local. So, you know, I've talked about assortments with you guys before, and assortments are changing, and they are more local because they are listening to the consumer more closely. So, you know, the smaller concept stores where these traditional department stores are used to playing, they're absolutely opening those pop-ups. The fact is, Shopify has helped, not to plug Shopify or anything, but Shopify has helped those smaller stores and small businesses play in that same playing field that an Amazon is playing in. What I'd be concerned about is what's happening with returns, because for the most part, not a lot of people are going in store. So they are, you know, trying things on at home, and then they have to return them. So, you know, my question is, what does that happen to sustainability and packaging? I mean, Amazon has been called out a number of times here. So has Winners, actually, in the UK, because they do DTC. So there's a lot of places for improvement, but I do think that there's a lot of opportunity for small business.
I think I would add the, you know, pre-COVID, you already had a lot of so-called DNVB, so digitally native vertical brands, people like Glossier or Away, or a whole bunch of basically startups that were founded between, I guess, 2005 and 2015, and they all started online. And after a while, they started to think, okay, well, that's, you know, we've built a bit of awareness, a bit of a reputation, but we need brick and mortar. You know, we need brick and mortar for the emotional ties that we're starting to develop with consumers, and we need brick and mortar also for incremental recruitment. And so, I mean, unfortunately for them, you know, if I take the example of Away, the luggage company, they were pretty aggressive just pre-COVID in opening stores, and, you know, hopefully for them, they'll look, you know, they'll see through this period. But I think it will probably be necessary for them to have either pop-up or more permanent locations to you know, to brand build. In the sector that I know more, so in the luxury space, I think the idea, or, you know, if you think about a Nike or an Apple, or I think ahead of the holiday season, because, you know, who knows where we'll be in North America in 3 months, but likelihood is We're all hoping for a vaccine, but unlikely that everyone will be chill and relaxed in 3 months just yet. So I think there are a lot of projects because you have retail space that is available now. Because unfortunately, some brands have struggled, or retail banners have struggled more than others. You'll have a lot of the stronger brands basically developing pop-ups, mostly to animate the brand a bit, but also to alleviate issues of traffic. If you're in a big buying period and you can't accommodate the number of people that you usually do, think about Tiffany sales ahead of Christmas. You don't have a lot of traffic at Tiffany, but the 2 weeks before Christmas, you have the loads. So you probably have to think about an alternative to be able to service your consumer. And so I think a lot of we'll probably see, bizarrely, despite the period, in the next 3-4 months, we'll see incredibly innovative, creative concepts coming up.
Yeah, and I think you bring a really good point up around DTC moving into the brick and mortar space. Warby Parker is such a great example. They have a store on Queen Street in Toronto as well, which, I mean, super cool, great experience, but they're a DTC brand. Right. They do not hold inventory. Glossier, you brought up the Glossier example. They have a store in Soho for the experience, and they still have lineups. And then, of course, Hudson Yards. I mean, it's reopened now, but they had a whole floor dedicated to DTC brands showcasing in brick and mortar.
Right. But these are examples, great examples of, one brand opening an experiential store. I mean, those retailers that carry multiple brands, how do they compete with those types of stores that are creating their concept specifically for that brand?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a little bit more difficult. That's why retailers and brands have to be more customer centric. You look at Callaway, if anybody's into golf, they have launched their Maverick line of golf clubs where they were designed and developed through AI. So that's something that's going to lure that golf customer into the store, because they can actually take their phone, get a QR code, they can actually see the process of how this was made and manufactured. And it also shows the sustainability of the product. So I think that the customer experience is what's going to lure the customers to brick and mortar. But I do think that a lot of brands are not going to survive COVID.
So you bring up a great segue into kind of technology. And technology has kind of been a conversation throughout this conference. It was a great panel discussion on fintech earlier today that I listened into. Technology in the retail space, in the future of retail. You talked about kind of consumer data. Let's maybe expand on that. What does technology look like in terms of affecting the future of retail, and how does that impact kind of all the way through the supply chain? Lisa, let's start.
Oh gosh, I love this subject. Technology is at the center of everything. For the future of retail specifically, from end to end. And we can talk about product design. So the actual design of the product, the use of more 3D tools, less samples out of Asia. I think that's a huge one, because you're reducing your carbon footprint that way. Skill sets are changing. The way that we're putting together product create teams and teams across the end-to-end process. They are becoming more digitized. We are using data and analytics to actually drive decisions instead of the traditional buyer using their gut, which has been proven to not be the greatest tool in terms of developing an assortment. So technology playing a part in supply chain, where they have robots at Best Buy warehouses and some Walmart ones too. So I think that the workforce is changing. Digitization, AI, machine learning, robots, they're not actually taking the place of people, but people will need to change the way they look at work in the future.
But it's a great point. But are they not necessarily taking the place of people? I mean, we look at stores like Amazon Go, or other types of retailers who are looking at full automation, not only just for in terms of efficiencies, but even to pandemic-proof their business. In the future, are we looking at a kind of a situation where basically we're walking into stores and walking out without interacting with anybody?
I think that's definitely a possibility. When I talk about the end-to-end, I'm talking about the actual creation of the product and how that's changing the way of the workforce in retail. So not necessarily the staff in stores, but really behind the scenes. Yeah. So looking at merchants and buyers more as consumer strategists, employing data scientists to help not only build and predict what the customer actually wants, but validating with the customer with tools via apps to actually validate a sneaker before it gets produced. So just the way that we are looking at the future of retail, it really comes down to who is doing the work, where are they doing the work, how are they doing the work, and what are they doing?
And Erwan, in terms of luxury, I mean, luxury is an interesting industry. They've had to make significant changes over the last decades, as you know, and you've kind of predicted some of the changes that would need to occur for the next decades for them to kind of be relevant. What do you see in terms of technology and data and all these things as relevant to the luxury business, and how maybe other retailers can kind of learn from that?
I think so. Lisa was mentioning data scientists. I think the word data scientist and the word algorithm was not part of the luxury vocabulary up until a few years ago. And I think I told you this as a joke the first time we met, that when I used to work in marketing functions in luxury, we didn't have a clue who we sold to. Obviously, that's had to change dramatically. The reason we didn't have to know is the growth was off the charts, and I think our main focus was essentially to try to figure out how we can supply enough. Now you're moving into an era where competition is a lot tougher. You need to actually know your consumer inside out, and knowledge is power. And I think if you are a sales associate, 2-3 years ago in luxury, you ran the risk that the consumer actually knew more about the brand than you did. And that starts to be a bit uncomfortable. And so now that you have implemented CRM systems and that you have phenomenal knowledge about who your consumer is, what she likes, when did she buy in your store last time, when was her kid's birthday, what is his favorite color, et cetera, you start to develop a relationship which is a lot more intimate. And where I think you have a much better chance of people becoming a lot more loyal to your brand. So for me, technology in luxury has been around enhancing the value proposition, enhancing the emotional ties that exist already between consumers and brands, and basically empowering the sales associate. I think there was an interesting interview recently from the CEO of Louis Vuitton, which is probably the biggest brand by sales in my coverage. And I think the journalist was asking, what happens when your 400 and whatever stores are closed? And he said, well, we have 12,000 stores. The 12,000 stores are our sales associates. They have the relationships. They will call the consumers. They will tell them, hey, we know that you like this or that product from the previous collection. We're pretty sure you'll like this. Please come back and let's, so I think that level of knowledge, which completely lacked in this industry, is now a great differentiator. And it's probably, unfortunately, for the smaller guys, one of the reasons why the bigger groups or the bigger brands are outperforming, because they have means to invest in that knowledge building.
Right. And so if you look at, and I mean, it'd be silly for us not to have a conversation about what Amazon is doing, and in terms of what the future of retail looks like, given their influence on the space. For those smaller consumers who are, for the consumer themselves, value is still a very, very important aspect of their decision. Convenience is a factor. Even just being able to get it delivered to your house the same day is a factor. So Amazon offers a lot of the things that the other retailers that you described may not be able to offer. They can offer an experience, but they won't necessarily offer that level of convenience that even something like Amazon's offering. Well, if you look at Amazon, how is that actually going to impact even just the way we shop in the future, and just what do we even place as important when we have someone like that in the space?
Yeah. So it's interesting that you would ask the question, because Amazon is trying to develop a luxury arm. And if you interview most of the luxury brand CEOs and ask them, hey, when are you going to be available on Amazon? They tell you, well, probably the successor of my successor might think about it, but not under my watch. So I think there's a lot that luxury can learn from Amazon. To your point, very quick delivery, very efficient service. There's a real gap between convenience, i.e., you can basically reorder without even phoning or being online. You can have a calculation of how long your detergent product will last, and it will reorder itself. So it's not about price. It's not about the product. Sorry, it's not about the brand. It's about the price and about the convenience. And it's almost the opposite of luxury. I.e., luxury is about the story. It's about the experience. It's about the brand. It's not about plugging in a particular function. There is no rationale to buy a luxury product. It's purely emotional. It doesn't serve a purpose other than to make you happy. No one needs a handbag, no one needs a watch, no one needs a piece of jewelry. So I believe, and it's probably not a surprise that the richest in the world are Jeff Bezos from Amazon and Bernard Arnault from LVMH, two completely opposite models, again corresponding to this massive dichotomy between a value for money purchase and incredible convenience, and something that's completely superfluous on paper, but actually incredibly important from an emotional perspective. But again, luxury folks can learn a lot from Amazon in terms of what type of habits have consumers developed? What are their expectations? And how am I completely antiquated relative to fulfilling that? So I think there's a need for speed. There's a need for an understanding that you need to indeed deliver things pretty quickly, pretty efficiently, seamlessly. I think if you went on, luxury.com websites a few years ago, it was appalling, right? So, there's a lot that they have learned and that they will continue to learn from Amazon. I don't think they'll sell on Amazon, but I think they'll be inspired by a few aspects.
Yeah, I think that a lot of retailers can learn from Amazon, and they are. And in terms of luxury, you look at My Teresa, you look at Matches Fashion, they do same day delivery, it's white glove service. So, I think that the luxury world does have, they do have a lot to learn, but I do think that they are making definitely strides forward.
So, one of the things I wanted to kind of come back to in terms of like what we're seeing with the consumer's perspective is, again, this idea of corporate social responsibility, or some sort of ethical practicing, or whatever, the term is now, because it's so wide. We're seeing it being, again, something that's expected of companies and not necessarily a differentiator. How do you see that, impacting even just consumer selection and of retailers and where they go? And is there a place for retailers to really amplify that, their message and to really kind of stand out? Or is it just something now that you have to do and now differentiate some other way?
I think that this sustainability and responsible retail is at the forefront of most retailers' mission statements right now. That full transparency means a lot to the customer, and because the customer is evolving, they have access to so much more information than ever before. And that access, like you said earlier, Erwan, knowledge is power.
Yeah, I don't want to plug my book. I talk about this topic a bit in my book. I'll plug another book, which is called Fashionopolis, which came out about a year ago, and which basically explains how the fashion industry is the most pollutive industry on the planet. And I think, if you think about fast fashion, and if you think about the cycle of, I buy this on the cheap, I wear it 4 times, and then I chuck it away, it's absolutely dramatic for the planet. And I think there is finally a new generation that's asking questions and demanding stuff from corporates. And there is no such thing for the time being as circularity in luxury, but it has to come. I mean, you're starting to see a bit of development on the front of secondhand. but again, more skewed to the US than to the Far East or to Europe for the time being. You're starting to see consumers asking for provenance of products, asking for the way it's been manufactured, asking for substitutes. We're seeing a huge development in North America, essentially, of lab-grown diamonds relative to mined diamonds. You are seeing substitutes for leather, substitutes for a whole series, essentially, of items that are part of the supply chain of these products. So, for me, it's again, I think you'll need a lot of investments from the firms. You've had a scandal a while ago where, Burberry, the British luxury brand, was burning whatever they didn't sell. And obviously that was in the news and it wasn't fantastic from an image point of view, but they were not the only ones. And I think the reality is, again, there is a demand out there for, to be a good corporate citizen. And it's not just about the environment, actually. It's about your values. It's about what did you do for the community during COVID? Did you repurpose your manufacturing sites to develop gel or PPE, or did you give to charity? Did you build a hospital? Did you, a lot of brands have been vocal, and cynics will say, yeah, that's more like cosmetic, and they don't really mean it. Well, if they invest money, they mean it to a certain degree, I guess. But there are a lot of questions being asked, and I think that's the hope of the new generation. I'm very hopeful, actually. That an industry that I cover that's been incredibly pollutive and incredibly arrogant and incredibly about short-term profits is looking long-term now, because it has to.
And I think, that's a great tie-in to fast fashion and the development of fast fabrics and synthetic fabrics and what that's doing to the environment, and how we cannot even measure the amount of microplastics from these fabrics and the dyes, like how much is actually polluting the environment. And that's where transparency will come into play a lot more. Where are textiles actually coming from? Talking about textiles could actually be another hour conversation, just because we're losing so many of those skilled workers, the yarn dyers, the actual people that work with artisan fabrics, because once you remove the synthetic fabrics and how much they're polluting the industry, what's going to happen to, the sustainable fabrics, which are the natural fabrics and fibers? Mm-hmm. And if you're losing all those tradespeople, what is going to happen? So it'll be interesting to see, where we end up.
So, in terms of how that translates into that future of retail, I'm assuming that, you talked about kind of the whole supply chain from the start to the finish. I'm guessing maybe, we're thinking about any type of minimalist type of experience, packaging being impacted, some sort of, again, recyclables or any type of things that I guess, go to sustainability, again, heavy investment type of options. But are those, the companies that lead that, like who's leading that, the charge in that, and who should we be paying attention to when it comes to those things? Do we think about what the future might look like?
I think you can actually turn it into a marketing tool. I think the sporting goods industry, if you think about Puma, Adidas, Nike, they've been really good at advertising footwear, athletic footwear made of 100% of recycled plastic, ocean plastic, for example. You've had Prada. Prada has a nylon range, which they now call Re-Nylon because it's all recycled nylon, again, mostly from the ocean. So I think something that starts as a constraint can become a huge opportunity, and a selling point. Samsonite, for example, has developed a few ranges in the past with luggage made only of recycled plastic. And now their message is to say, you know what, if it's just a range, it means we're not 100% behind it. So now it's going to be 100% of our ranges actually, not fully from recycled material, but at least a portion of it. So, it started off as a sort of test phase of what will the consumers think about it? Is this a good selling point? To actually, you know what, we're moving from a range to actually the way we rethink our business entirely. So I think, I think you're moving from a constraint to an opportunity pretty quickly. I had a former CEO in the luxury space telling me the role that is missing in luxury today is for a chief circularity officer. I thought he was joking initially, and now I'm starting to get it, because indeed, I think it's very difficult to imagine that you can continue to thrive and to sell a lot of products that at the end of the day will just end up being destroyed.
Yeah.
And so if you have this sort of Patagonia way of thinking where nothing ever dies, if your product is not fantastic after a few years, you can give it to them, they'll give it to someone else, or they'll repair it and give it back to you, and they will extend the lifespan of the product. I think they are, in my eyes, they are a brand that has inspired many others.
Great. Okay, I want to switch gears a little bit here, because I think, we've talked a lot about apparel and a lot about kind of luxury brands, again, stuff that we're familiar with. And, Lisa, I know you have, a vast knowledge across different industries as well. Let's think about maybe some other types of retailers and what the future might look like. We talked about kind of Amazon Go previously, grocery itself. What does the future of grocery look like? Not just in terms of the consumer experience, but how do grocers be, how are they and manufacturers really kind of getting consumers exposed to those products that, typically consumers would see on a flyer or go into a store and see on shelf? And maybe if, things are kind of being shopped online, I'm not getting exposed to them. Costco, for example, some of the biggest business that that they source is from new innovative products, from consumers actually going in and trying, and consumers are just not going to go in and try new products necessarily anymore. How does the grocer experience really change, and what does that look like in the future?
I think, traditionally the grocery store configuration, that's something that not a lot of people have talked about, but the reason why the milk is where it is because they want you to go through every aisle. So I think that the configuration of the store will change, but also things like meal kits, things like more choices for delivery, local product. I think those are the things that will drive grocery in the future. Smaller concept stores. I think that's something that, I'm not certain about it, but I think that it is the way of the future. But then again, Loblaw just opened yesterday at Bathurst in front, like this gigantic store. So I think it's going to be a mix of a lot of things, but I think meal kits probably in the more immediate future, and then maybe store configuration.
So one of the things that we saw in our research were consumers, again, kind of spending more on premium products in grocery, almost replacing that out-of-home experience with some sort of premiumized in-home experience. Mm-hmm. We see consumers going direct to farms, to locally sourced, skipping the grocer altogether and going more direct to the what was traditionally more of a wholesaler selling direct to consumer. Do you think that are grocers at risk? Are they at risk of the consumer going now direct to a source as opposed to the grocer, or is it
I think to a certain degree, yes. We shop local from a farm that gets delivered. Our meat as well, same thing. So I do think that the more urban customer is doing that, but I think that somebody in a suburb or in London, Ontario, like my parents, they still will go to a grocery store. So I think it's a bit of both. I think there's room for all of it. You are finding more local products in a grocery store, whether it's, from sweet corn to vegetables, but then you're also finding that people are not traveling. So they want that, that Italian antipasta, or, something from, Asia, that they're not going to be traveling the next year. So they need to get that home experience from the product. So it, as I've always said, it all comes down to the product assortment, which is driven by the customer.
Another thing I wanted to mention was kind of this idea of and I mentioned this earlier, this inconspicuous consumption. So kind of, again, kind of somewhat back to luxury or premium. We saw this kind of with the Great Depression, people not wanting to, showcase their wealth, especially in a time when there was so much poverty and a massive recession and depression. We're seeing again that kind of attitudes, at least the North American attitudes towards this kind of inconspicuous consumption, investments in certain things that don't necessarily show off your wealth. Is that a trend that we think that might continue, and how does that really impact kind of that retail experience? People aren't necessarily going to go shopping at very premium brands, and maybe it's does it change completely how they actually shop for those things?
I think so. We just went through the anniversary of 9/11. I think post 9/11, you had what a lot of brands in the US called the guilt factor, i.e. they had the money, consumers had the money to buy luxury, but it was seen as inappropriate for the times. And I think you might be seeing again a period, at least in North America, of a bit of subtlety. You're moving away from flashy logos, incredibly, in your face, colorful products, to something that's a bit more understated, a bit more discreet. I wouldn't say that this is a general trend, though. This is more a North American trend. I was very surprised speaking to friends in Shanghai in April and May who were telling me, hey, COVID-19 will be a vague negative souvenir. I'm based in New York. I don't think I will ever describe my experience of COVID-19 as a vague negative souvenir. It's a proper trauma in North America. So if you look at luxury consumption in China, it's still very much flashy, colorful. There is no issue of being visible. But I think certainly here and likely in Western Europe as well, you're going towards more subtlety. And the good thing about that is, and this is a point that Lisa was making, you have fewer seasonal products. You're focusing more on carryover items. And as such, you're not wasting as much, right? Because you don't have to go as much on sale at the end of the season. You don't have to destroy or basically go on promotion to get rid of inventory. So it's you're extending the life on the shelf or online of a product that's more a carryover product. But yeah, I mean, we've had a few comments from the likes of people working at Prada or elsewhere talking about going back to the 90s, and so very streamlined, very slick, very discreet designs.
I will say that within the luxury market, what I've seen and been invited to are a lot more private shopping events. So that's guaranteeing my safety. It's guaranteeing that I can still have that luxury shopping experience in a Christian Louboutin or a Dior that I would generally have. And that's why I would want to shop luxury, is for that experience. So I've seen an increase of the private shopping event. And I think that really ties into loyalty and customer loyalty, where the luxury market does have a very loyal customer, but because I think the luxury, especially the luxury market, they have a lot of customer data, and they're piggybacking on that and training the sales associate to really use that data to enhance that customer loyalty, and then in turn, hopefully customize that customer shopping experience.
Okay, we got 5 minutes left. There's a couple things I want to just bring up because there are a couple questions that have come in. One being around the corner store, so convenience store. So everything now is basically I can order online and have it delivered through Uber Eats or Foodora or whenever that was. I think that's gone now, but not in Toronto at least, but globally. So I can get some delivered from 7-Eleven. What happens to the corner store? Is the corner store still relevant?
Yeah, I think it is. I think that small business is still relevant. The corner store is still relevant because people want to shop local. They want to support the little guy. So I do think that the small businesses are hustling to have more of a presence in their local, the local street or in Leslieville or wherever the case is. But I would say it's not going anywhere, because I think that the consumer is supporting that little guy right now, especially with the state of the world.
And maybe,
I don't think
vice
it's
versa. Maybe it's about the corner store also supporting the community.
Yes, exactly.
And then, I think also I want to talk about, we talked about Amazon so much, Wayfair. So, another kind of massive rise in the stock price of Wayfair since the pandemic started. Furniture retail. You think about the future of furniture retail. Wayfair is, just basically dominated kind of deliveries of furniture. I even got a kitchen sink, which was, just massive amounts of packaging and foam for a kitchen sink. But, where do we see the future of even just furniture retailers in the last 3 minutes that we have?
Erwan, do you want to take this?
No one's traveling, right? So again, we're stuck at home. We're on Zoom. We're trying to stay fit. We're trying to stay healthy, and we'd like to reward ourselves because we've seen through this, and we're hoping for better days. And so, home furnishing for me is it's quite obvious why it would work in this period.
Yeah.
Are people going there? Are people going to go to retailers though?
I think so. I think it depends where they're going. If they're going to a design within reach, yeah, they're going in the store probably. But home furnishings, home decor, and home improvement, I don't think are going anywhere.
Yeah. So, but what the benefit that they have, that Wayfair has, is just literally being able to look through a vast amount of assortment. Furniture retailers, the physical locations don't have that luxury. So they're limited in terms of what they can carry or what they can showcase. When you think about, just again, going to the Amazon example about just having so much available to you at a click of a button, do furnitures really have to differentiate, and how can they differentiate on that?
I think it's also the type of furniture, because if you're looking at pieces like Eames or Cartel or something that's more luxury, you want to make sure that it's an investment piece. It's something that doesn't lose its value. Where you're shopping from a Wayfair or an Amazon for, a light or some patio furniture, that's something that you're going to replace. So that's, I'm not saying it's like fast fashion, but I do think that investment pieces, people are absolutely going in stores. They want to touch and feel. They want to make sure, okay, I'm spending $500 on a chair. I want to make sure that it is the right chair. It fits. It looks good in my place, because it's an investment.
Great. All right. So I think we're basically at our time now. We want to just thank you both for joining us for the session on Future Retail. We talked about some great things in terms of technology and automation and data, and how that's going to affect, just not only the larger brands, but some of the smaller brands as well. So I appreciate it. I don't see any other questions coming in at this time, but I know that people can access the recording afterwards. So I wanted to say
thanks, Paul, for hosting.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for joining, and thanks everyone else for joining as well.
Amazing.
Take care.